Hello. I'm just gonna showcase a little bit of a mod I did for Warhammer 3 just to show what units 40k could have and have a little rant about it. So all I really did here was take an aspiring champion and just make them into 8 models, give them a lot more stats. And as for the units with guns, you can kind of see that it's kind of janky. I'm not great at modding, but this one is supposed to be like a bolter type Space Marine. You know, they fire multiple shots per volley so that it can be more like a semi-automatic kind of gun. And then we have the, I would assume like an assault marine, like, you know, they have a sword and a pistol. Again, the models don't really make it look like that, but whatever. And then this one is supposed to be like, let's say, a guardsman, where they fire laser guns. So we'll just showcase that a little bit. So one thing I've noticed when modding is that it's really weird. So you can see here, I made the missile strength to 5 shots per volley, but because a regular engineer shoots 6 times, I can't seem to change that, but that's fine. And you know, in lore, the bolt guns are supposed to be like kind of a little bit explosive, so I also tried to emulate that a little bit. And if you see the shots go, you'll see that they'll fire a bunch of shots and they do a little bit of explosion, and they just you know, make it kind of lore accurate. So I can't really rein in the effects too much. These guys are definitely too strong. But you know, if Creative Assembly is going to make a 40k with Space Marines and stuff like that, they would make that a bit more balanced, and then it would be pretty good, I think. So yeah, and then they can also get into melee because, you know, they're Space Marines. We have these guys, and these guys are las guns. So basically using the fire glaive shots and sound effects. And you'll notice that I really lowered their firing reload time so that they can fire a bit more shots. Just to make it more like, you know, las guns aren't like a musket type where you have to fire and reload. You can fire a bunch of times. That's kind of what I did to emulate that. And then I made the armor piercing 0 because if you let... Because, you know, a guardsman is supposed to be numerous, right? They're supposed to send in billions upon billions of them, and they win because of their numbers in artillery. So a guardsman has to be pretty high in numbers, and if all of them have even 1 armor piercing and fire at this amount of speed, they'll do too much damage to everything. So I think Creative Assembly can balance that by giving them a lot of fire rate, but making the armor piercing a lot lower. That way they won't just kill Scarbrand with like a few shots or something. So yeah, and then yeah, Space Marines, aspiring champions, they're basically Space Marines, like, let's be honest. They're supposed to be like super elite heavy infantry that is like close to being Lord level. So yeah, just imagine that these guys are not Chaos guys, and just that they're Space Marines. So yeah, that's kind of what I think Creative Assembly can do to make Space Marines into kind of a realistic, not super OP units, basically. Now, for a 40k Total War game, I've seen a lot of people say things like, well, Total War is not made for a 40k type game, it's not gonna be able to be big enough, the galaxy's too big. But I don't think they made that point in any other 40k game, right? Like, let's say, for example, Dawn of War. They mostly just stay on a planet, and a bunch of factions are on that single planet, and you have to beat them all up, right? How is that any different from Total War 40k will be? But no one had a problem with that. And let's say Gladius. So that is basically a Civ type game where you're on a planet, a bunch of factions are there, you're collecting resources. Again, it's not galaxy spanning, but no one had a problem with that, so I think that's just fine. If you even look at something like, let's say, Space Marine 2, there's 3 planets. One is a jungle world, one is like an industry world or something, and one's a graveyard, right? So how is that much different from, let's say, in Immortal Empires, there's Lustria, which is a jungle area, and then there is Empire, which I don't think is very industrial, but you could say that the Chaos Dwarves, for example, I think they're around here. Yeah. So Chaos Dwarves are an industry area, and then in Sylvania, that's like a graveyard area, right? So it isn't even that different, even in Space Marine 2. All that really does is a scenery change, and that is less interesting than having a big map that can have all these biomes kind of connected. Another thing that I heard people say is they need to have ship combat, which I don't really agree with because, first of all, Gothic Armada exists. That's basically a ship type combat, but it's like made to be a ship combat. You don't really need to shoehorn that into a Total War game, I feel like. Just stay on a planet, or if you want, you can say one planet is this map, and that you can play your campaign on that map. On another planet is a different map, and it might have different characters. You could do it like that, but you don't need to make them all connected. That's a bit too much, I think. And there's also Total War had naval combat, which could be adjusted to be like 40k ship combat, but that would be not very likely because, for example, Creative Assembly didn't put ship combat in Warhammer, probably because there's too much assets that they have to deal with, and I think most people didn't like the ship combat in the first place, so they kind of gave up on it. And that means 40k Total War isn't going to be that difficult, I feel like. People even say things like Total War 40k can't happen because 40k is mostly a squad-based game. Well, in the lore, which, it's kind of the main thing, there's supposed to be billions of guardsmen that die every day, and that does nothing to decrease the human population. So, realistically speaking, it should be giant galactic scale wars going on. The reason that they make it into squad-based combat is because if you have to buy like 100 guardsmen to have one unit in a tabletop game, that'll be just horrible. That's why they made it a squad-based combat. In a game like Total War, you can have that giant galactic, not really galactic, but like many units warfare. And I think that would make it more interesting and more lore accurate or whatever, which, some people care about. And people say things like, you need a cover system because, guardsmen need to be in cover and stuff. I think all you really need to do is, for example, sieges have given units the ability to mount the walls and get some bonuses from it, like missile resist. And there's also effects like dig in, which if you're in there for like 15 seconds, you get some extra bonuses. I think all you need to do is make a forest-like environment area where if you're in there for 15 seconds, you get these buffs, and if you're in there, you can like missile resist. Maybe even make it into a building type of structure so that if the enemy shoots at it enough, it'll destroy the cover. That way you can have a squad-based, not really squad-based, but like cover system, which isn't too complicated. It's basically just moving into the forest, and it'll give you buffs, and you can do damage to it at some point. Now, the one thing that might be an issue is the environment is kind of janky. Sometimes there's trees, but they aren't counted as trees, so it doesn't hide your guys. So they need to really kind of make it obvious that, hey, this is a cover. Like they might even need to outline it and say, this yellow area or whatever, that's a building which you can go into. It's cover. Maybe that can be kind of wonky, but I think Total War 40k in general can happen. It's not too hard to make it happen, I feel like. So, yeah.